Hi, I'm Ron Moses. Welcome to the Atomic the Card Game video tutorial. Atomic the Card Game is based on concepts relating to chemistry, but you don't need to know anything about chemistry in order to play it, and you're not going to learn anything about chemistry during the course of playing it. It's not that kind of a game. Atomic the Card Game is a build and explode game where you're going to combine elements into chains, and then you're going to blow up those chains using catalysts to trigger reactions. While you're doing that, your opponents are going to try to stop you from doing that, and you're going to try to stop them from doing that, and everyone's going to butt heads until finally somebody scores 1,000 points. You can play Atomic the Card Game with 2 to 5 players. Each different number of players gives a different flavor to the game. My favorite is 4 players. I think it gives the best combination of action and strategy. The 2-player game is more chaotic and cutthroat. The 3-player game falls somewhere in between, and a 5-player game is a lot like the 4-player game, it just takes a lot longer. So let's get started by introducing you to each of the different kinds of cards, and then we'll show how they interact with one another, and eventually we'll put it all together into a game. The 7 kinds of cards are elements, bonds, catalysts, water, sponges, antimatter, and experiments. First, let's look at elements. Elements are your basic building blocks. Throughout the game, each player will maintain their own set of elements in front of them on the table. Elements from different players don't interact. These are the things you're going to build into chains. You'll notice that each has a point value. Each has arrows on the side, green and purple, sometimes both. Some have 2. These show how elements get stuck together. At the top and the bottom are symbols that show how you blow the elements up. Next, let's look at bonds. Bonds are the glue that stick elements together. And there are 2 basic types, green and purple. There's also a 3rd kind that is a bicolor bond. It can act as a green or a purple. Let's look at how these work in conjunction with elements. Let's say we have these 2 elements here. Now you'll notice that there are 2 green arrows here facing each other. This means that we could take a green bond and we can bond those 2 elements together into a chain. Once I've placed a bond in between these are locked in place. I can move them around the table, but I can't break them apart. I can only play a bond to link 2 elements together. I can't just place it out on the table by itself. I can't link it to just one element. Always chains together 2 elements. By the same token, if I had these the other way around, I could use a purple bond to link them together. Now, bicolor bonds, they can act as either a purple or a green, which means I could use it here. I could use it like this in place of a green. What I can also do, a bicolor bond can act as both a purple and a green at the same time, linking together a green and a purple arrow. Some elements have 2 arrows. This means that they require 2 bonds, a green and a purple. That's called a double bond. They need to have both. Now you can use bicolor bonds in a double bond. You can use it and replace the green. You could use it to replace the purple. You could even use it to replace both. But you need to have 2. You can't just do that. A bicolor bond can't serve as both bonds in a double bond. You always need 2. So this is how we bond elements together. Next, let's look at catalysts. Catalysts trigger reactions between chains. This is how you score points. There are 3 types of catalysts: light, electricity, and fire. Each has a different multiplier. Light is ×1, electricity is ×2, and fire is ×3. The more rare the catalyst, the higher the multiplier. Let's take a look at how we use catalysts to trigger reactions. I'm going to build two chains. Here's a simple chain here. And I'm going to make another one here. So now I have two chains in front of me on the table. Two simple chains. Now if you'll notice, there are symbols at the top and the bottom of each element, and these tell us what catalysts we can use to trigger a reaction. But there must be matching symbols between the cards as they face each other. If you notice here, there are two light symbols. This one has both an electricity and a light symbol. That just means I can use either or here. What this tells me is that I could use a light catalyst right here, and I can trigger a reaction between these two chains. That will give me 15, 30, 45, 60 points times 1 for a total of 60 points for this reaction. Now, I can use more than one catalyst if possible. Let's replace this with this element. Let's say I have these two chains. Now, assuming I have the right catalysts in my hand, I could play two catalysts. Now I've still got the 60 points, but this time it's times 1 plus 3 times 4. That's 240 points. That's a big difference. Now I want to show you one other thing. Let's say that this chain down here was a bit longer. One thing you can do is that in any given reaction, you can include one single unchained element. What I mean by that is that you can take an element that is not part of a chain, only one, you can't take more than one, only one, and you can include it in your reaction to give it a little bit more juice, which in this case, as you could see, brings our reaction up to 90 times 6, which is a pretty big reaction. Additionally, I could add more chains to my reaction up above. If I had room to show you, I would, but I could take more chains up here and put as many chains together as I want to, so long as they're all connected, and I can use as many catalysts as I want. And that's how I trigger a reaction. Once you trigger your reaction and you tell your opponents how many points you've scored, they get to take a little action. And this is where the next type of card comes in, and that's water. Water is a defensive card, and it's the only card that you can play when it's not your turn. As soon as you announce your score, the water round begins. Beginning with the person to your left, they have the opportunity, if they have one, to play a water. Water destroys a catalyst. So in this case, let's say that I'm playing with a 4-player game. I've got 3 opponents. The person to my left says, well, I'm going to play a water on your fire. He just destroyed the fire catalyst. The water gets discarded. The fire gets shuffled back into the deck. Now my reaction is down to this. I'm down to a times 3 multiplier. The next person across from me, if they have a water, they can play a water on one of the remaining catalysts, probably the electricity because it's worth more. Now if the person across from me has a water and doesn't want to play it, they can simply say pass. At the same time, if they don't have a water, they can also say pass. They don't need to indicate whether or not they have a water. Just saying pass is sufficient. So let's say that the person across from me says pass, the person to my right also has a water, and they decide that they're going to take out my electricity. The water gets discarded, the electricity gets shuffled back into the deck. Now, notice this. This element is no longer part of the reaction. It stays on the table, doesn't get discarded, I still own it. But it's not part of this reaction anymore because it's not connected via catalysts. Once each player has had one opportunity to play one water, the water round is over, and I can score whatever's left. Now, when somebody plays a water, if you're very fortunate, you might have a sponge. There are only 2 sponges in the deck. The player to my left might say, I'm going to play a water on your fire, and I say, hold on a second, I'm going to soak up your water with a sponge. Sponges counter water. And then both would get discarded, and my fire would be safe. The next person passes, the person to my right, they can play their water on my fire. I probably don't have another sponge at that point. The fire gets shuffled, the water gets discarded, and I'm left with this much of a reaction. So that's how reactions work. That's how waters can be used to destroy catalysts, and you can use a sponge against a water during the water round. Okay, let's clean up a little bit. Now let's say I have this in front of me. I'm going to show you the next kind of card, which is antimatter. Antimatter destroys elements. So for example, I might take this antimatter, or one of my opponents might take this antimatter, and might decide to play it on this element. They both get discarded. Now, if you recall, we can't have a bond just sitting out in space like this. So because of that, the bond would also get discarded. Bear this in mind when you're creating long chains like this one, because you've got a weak point right in the middle there. Somebody might come along and play an antimatter on that middle element. That means that not only do you lose the element, you lose both of these bonds. And that's a big hit. Now, each antimatter has a point value on it. An antimatter can only destroy an element up to that value. So, for example, one of these 20s can destroy any of these elements. But if I had, let's say, a 65, 20 couldn't touch it. Somebody would need to bring out the big 75 pointer to take that out. Now, an antimatter can only take out one element. So you couldn't take the 75 and say, I'm going to take out all of these in one shot. Doesn't work that way. An antimatter can only take out one single element. Both cards are discarded. The final card I want to show you is the experiment. Experiments simply do funky things to the game. There are 11 of them in the deck. All you need to do is read them and do what they say. For example, Event Horizon says, choose an opponent. They discard their hand immediately. Pretty straightforward. It's a nice little attack card. Reproducible Results says, take another turn after you complete this one. That's easy enough. Global Warming. All players must discard all waters from their hands. That's a nice card to play right before you're about to do a reaction, because then nobody can counter your catalysts with water. And so forth. Each of the 11 experiments does something different. So that's what experiments do. Now let's put it all together and see how the game is played. First, before your first game, I recommend shuffling the heck out of your deck. I mean, shuffle it a lot. It's going to require an awful lot of mixing, and it's a big deck, and it's difficult to mix. So spend a lot of time shuffling it. Once you've played, the cards will randomize well enough, and you won't have to worry about it after that. But that first time out of the box, do a really, really good job of shuffling it. So when you begin the game, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to select a dealer. If there's a first-time player at the table, you should let them deal. This gives them a chance to watch everybody else play before it's their turn, so they have a better idea of what's expected of them. Now, once everybody has been dealt 9 cards, everybody gets to take a little action before the game really gets going. And this is a time when you can get a few elements and bonds out onto the table in front of you just to get started. You have 2 options during this phase prior to when the game really starts. You can either put out as many elements and bonds as you want and then draw your hand back up to 9. Or you can do a discard and draw and then put out up to 3 elements and bonds and draw your hand back up to 9. Let me illustrate. I'm just going to pick up a few cards at random and say that this is my hand. It's sloppy, it's too many cards, doesn't matter. It's just for illustration purposes. And I decide that I'm going to put out a couple of elements, and I'm going to put out a few bonds here, and I'm going to bond these together. And now that I've done that, I'm going to take cards from the deck and make sure I have 9 cards in my hand, and I'm good to go. And that would be option 1. Putting out as many elements and bonds as you want to, and then drawing your hand back up to 9. Now let's say that my draw is not quite that good, and I ended up with something like this. Well, I don't have much in the way of elements and bonds to put out. This is kind of a cruddy starting hand. I could just put these 2 elements out, but I'd like to shoot for something a little better. So what I'm going to do is let's see, I don't really need that one. I don't need those right now. I don't need 2 of those. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to discard those. I'm going to draw my hand back up to 9 cards and hope that I get something better. Oh good, I got a few better things. Now I get to put out some elements and bonds. But because I just took that advantage of doing a discard and draw, I only get to put out up to 3. I don't get to put out as many as I want to like everybody else did. I can only put out up to 3, and I'll go ahead and I'll do that. And then I can draw my hand back up to 9 and I'm ready to start. Everyone should have 9 cards when the game starts. Now we start to play. Each player on their turn gets 3 actions. They get to do 3 things. And there are 5 things that you can do. The first thing you can do is build. And to build means to play any combination of up to 2 elements and bonds. What that might mean is you might play 2 elements. Or, let's say I have an element out already, I might play an element and a bond. Or I might have these 2 elements out, and I might play 2 bonds. Any combination of up to 2 elements and bonds is called building. And that's the first kind of action that you can take. Build. Up to 2 elements and bonds. Now, here's an important thing to know when it comes to double bonds. When you're creating a double bond, you need to play both bonds as part of the same action. For example, let's say I have this on a table. I can't do this. For my first action, I'll play this element and this bond. And for my second action, I'll play this bond. That's wrong. And the reason is that at the end of your first action, you were left with this. And this is not legal. You cannot just have 1/2 of a double bond sitting on the table at the end of your action. What you would need to do is you would need to say, for my first action, I'm going to play this 1 element. For my second action, I'm going to play these 2 bonds. That's how you create a double bond in relation to the actions that you take. So that would be 2 build actions. So build is the first type of action. The second type of action is react. To play as many catalysts as you want to trigger one single reaction. It can involve as many chains and a single element if you want to throw a single element in there. But it has to all be one reaction. You can use as many catalysts as you can get away with. That's react. The third type of action is experiment. Play an experiment card. Simple enough. The fourth type of action is destroy. Play an antimatter card to destroy an element. And the final type of action is renew. And that means to discard as many cards as you want from your hand and draw your hand back up to 9. You can discard 0 if you want to, but the point is to draw your hand back up to 9. Bear in mind that you don't ever draw cards by virtue of having played. The only way to get more cards back into your hand is by doing a renew action, where you discard and draw. And you always draw your hand back up to 9. So again, the 5 kinds of actions are build, react, experiment, destroy, and renew. You get 3 actions per turn. You can do any of those 5 that you like. You can do them in any order you like. You can do the same action multiple times. Now that we've talked about actions, I want to go back to a couple of the experiments that relate to actions. Specifically, absolute zero. Absolute zero says no reactions are allowed while absolute zero is in play. That means that while this is on the table, nobody can trigger a reaction. Leave absolute zero in play until any player spends 2 actions to remove it. What that means is if you put absolute zero on the table using an experiment action, it stays there until somebody says, all right, this turn I have 3 actions. I'm going to spend 2 of those actions getting rid of this card. And now people can go ahead and trigger reactions. But that person only has 1 action left for that turn. Another action-related experiment is funding cut. All players except you get only 1 action per turn while funding cut is in play. What that means is, if I play funding cut, the player to my left only gets 1 action per turn. That player over there gets 1 action per turn, 1 action per turn. I still get 3 actions per turn. Leave funding cut in play until any player sacrifices 1 turn to remove it. So basically somebody is going to have to say, all right, I'm not going to do anything this turn. I sacrifice my turn to get rid of funding cut. Now everybody has their 3 actions back. So that is how actions work. Each player gets 3 actions per turn. The 5 kinds of actions you can do: build, react, experiment, destroy, and renew. And that's how you do it. The first player to 1,000 wins. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment on this video or email me at ronmoses@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing about your experiences with the game. I hope you have a good time. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you soon.